Thank you very much. I would like to welcome all of you, and I mean capital A-L-L, all of you. This is the biggest turnout we've ever had for one of these talks. I would like to welcome all of you to the Library Art Gallery for the first of the Library Lunchtime lectures for this year. I am very happy that Professor Metin Heper, Chair of Political Science and Dean of the Economic, Administrative and Social Science faculty, has agreed to be our first speaker for this semester. I should apologize for those of you who are standing and perhaps even more of you who failed to get a sandwich. But we were not anticipating such a big crowd, but that was a good thing that you're all here anyway. I did prepare my usual list of things to say, but with such a large crowd and the fact that Professor Heper is quite eager for us to have some discussion and questions at the end, I shall keep my comments to a minimum now. Professor Heper doesn't really need a formal introduction to a Bilkent audience. He's, I'm sure, well known to all or most of you at least. He is the founding chair of political science at Bilkent and is currently the dean of our faculty, as I say. He has spent time teaching in Metu and also in Boğaziçi before coming to Bilkent. He has also spent time visiting and working as professor and researcher in Northern American, European and other countries as well. In addition, he is a founding member of the Turkish Academy of Sciences and has been a member of the Council for Higher Education, amongst other important positions that he has held. He has published extensively in the fields of politics and society of modern Turkey. We have over 40 of his books. Some of them are translations from the English originals, I think, but over 40 titles in our catalogue at Bilkent. And his articles are over 100 in books and journals and elsewhere. His title today, The Kurdish Initiative, Some Thoughts on Contentious Issues. Now, when I first invited Professor Heper to speak in this series, I remembered that he had been planning to give a talk on the Kurdish issue about 3 or 4 years ago, but due to a health problem, that talk was cancelled. So I said, maybe you could do this again, or if you think it's better, we could do something a little bit less controversial. And Metin Bey's reply was, David, everything I work on is controversial. So here we are, okay? And the fact that you're all here today reflects to that. Just a couple of points to set things in motion first. He is planning to speak for about 30 minutes, I think we agreed, and then we will have 20 minutes, 15 minutes for questioning. We try to finish as close to 1:30 as possible because this is a lunchtime slot, so it gives people the chance to get to their 1:40 classes. And lastly, and I shall do this myself as we speak, please either switch your cell phones off or switch them to silent mode so that we don't interrupt the talk. Okay, mine is now off. Okay, I would invite Professor Heper to the podium and I wish him the best with his talks.
Thank you, David, for your very generous introduction. And thank you all for your interest in this presentation. I only hope that I can measure up to the expectations of you. As the name of the title of the presentation indicates, I shall be discussing about some of the contentious issues that have come up following the start of this process of the Kurdish initiative. It is also, of course, sometimes referred to as democratic initiative and most recently as national unity initiative. Milli Birlik Projesi. Now, we've been discussing this initiative or these initiatives for some time now, and it seems to me that what we are really debating is what is the real meaning of Turkish nation or Türk milleti. Some are loading to this phrase an ethnic meaning. And consequently, they are coming to the conclusion that when you talk about Turkish nation or Türk milleti, everybody, every group, every ethnic group, every religious group is Turkish, is Türk milleti, all right? For instance, one political party rejects Turkish nation being referred to as a mosaic. And they say, we are not accepting this. Turkish nation is a marble, they say. In Turkish, they use this word mermer now. In other words, we are in one piece. We are not a constellation of disparate elements. So you cannot talk about Kurds, Laz, Circassians, Bosnians. They are all ethnically Kurds. Then there is another political party. This political party is rather concerned that in this initiative, the phrase, the Turkish nation, may be removed from the constitution. And that political party is also concerned about this talk of Kurdish introduced in the schools, even if as an elective course, because they are arguing that this would be the beginning of the Kurdish being offered in schools, in formal education, as a mother tongue, as a compulsory course, and as a mother tongue. Now, consequently, these what you might call detractors of these initiatives are afraid of the fact that as a consequence of this process already started, we may face grave threats to national unity and the territorial integrity of this country. They are talking of the division of Turkey. They are talking of the flourishing of a Kurdish nation alongside the Turkish nation. And of course, each nation requires its own state, and therefore not one state, but two states. That's what they are seeing on the horizon, on the table. Now, is Turkey really under such a grave threat? We have two very recent nationwide surveys, and both of them seem to be very reliable surveys. One of them is Türkiye'nin Kürt sorunu algısı, the perception of Kurdish question in Turkey. And this reports a nationwide survey which was carried out in August, between 7th and 15th of August 2009. This survey was carried out by this SETA Foundation. It is Siyaset, Ekonomi ve Toplum Araştırmaları Vakfı, the Foundation of Political, Economic and Social Studies. Now, in this nationwide survey, people were asked how do they feel. Do you feel as a Kurd or as a Turk? Do you consider yourself as a Kurd or as a Turk? And those respondents who said we feel ourselves as a Kurd or as a Turk were asked some questions. Of course, the Turks were also asked for asked some questions. And needless to say, of course, I am using this word Kurd to mean Turkey's citizens of Kurdish origin. Now, the so-called Kurds, so-called here just a elaboration of what I have just said, not in a general sense. They were asked, do you have favorable attitudes or unfavorable attitudes towards the Turks. In Turkish, iyi kanaat, kötü kanaat. Now, 86.4% of the Kurds said we feel favorable attitudes towards the Turks. And only 7.2% said no, our attitudes toward the Kurds are not favorable, kötü kanaat. These Kurds were also asked how important is one's being a citizen of Turkish Republic. 62.8% of the respondents said it is very important. 13.7% of the respondents said it is important. 6% said not important, and 8.8% said not important at all. So those who consider being a citizen of Turkish Republic among the Kurds totals 79.1%, and those who see it not important or not important at all, 14.8%. Now, most significantly, there was another question in this nationwide survey, and this question was, what holds together people with different ethnic backgrounds? What holds together people with different ethnic backgrounds in Turkey? Now, the responses to this particular question were parallel to the responses that the people came up with to the two previous questions I have shared with you. 31.9% of the respondents thought religion is an important bond that keep people together in this country. 28.9% said it's the feeling of fraternity. They said kardeşlik duygusu, all right, the feeling of fraternity. 18.3% said it is the common history and geography, and 5.7% said it is national and cultural values. Altogether, 84.8% of the respondents thought it is either religion and or feeling of fraternity and or common history and geography and national cultural values. Now, if this is the case, why then do some people think that the Turkish initiative poses a great threat to the national unity and territorial integrity? Think along these lines. First of all, do not make a distinction between different meanings and different versions and different phenomena of nationalism. There are four types of nationalism. One is civic nationalism. Civic nationalism means that if you think, you are a citizen of a country and therefore you have loyalty to the state, to the country, to that particular country, then you are considered as a respectable member of that nation. So loyalty to the state, feeling of citizenship is the bond, is considered adequate bond to talk about nation. Those people making up a population are therefore called a nation. The second is cultural nationalism. Cultural nationalism means that the people who make up a nation share common visions, common ideals, and common values. So irrespective of race, religion, ethnicity, if these people share these feelings, these ideals, they are altogether called a nation. Then there is ethnic nationalism. Ethnic nationalism means that only those people who belong to a religion and or to an ethnicity make up a nation. Then there is, of course, racism. In this country, we use racism and ethnicity interchangeably, but racism, of course, is something else. You know, if you have certain physical characteristics, you would be thought of as less superior or more superior to others. Let me, in parentheses, indicate that we do use this, as I have just said, interchangeably. We start using it interchangeably with ethnicity in the 1930s and 1920s. So when you are reading anything, and if they talk about racism, most of the time what they have in mind is really ethnicity or ethnic nationalism. Then there's also patriotism. We should also keep in mind patriotism is also very important in Turkish vatanseverlik, of course, because in patriotism your focus is on your country and not on the people who make up the population of that country. By the way, in the Ottoman Empire, nationalism started as patriotism. Namık Kemal Vatan yahut Silistri, if you remember, was talking about vatanseverlik and the related issues. Now, in Turkey, presently, those of us who have some concerns about this particular project take nationalism as an ethnic nationalism. That's why they laud to that phrase Turkish nation and ethnic meaning. And of course, in ethnic nationalism, if there is an ethnic group which is in majority, it would usually try to assimilate the ethnic group or groups in minority. So there is a jump from this reasoning that the Turkish state adopted an assimilationist policy towards the Kurds, and Kurds, of course, came up with a resistance, all those rebellions between 1921 and 1938, and then, of course, those troubled times between 1984 and 1999, which to a certain extent still continues today, are considered, have been considered as ethnic rebellions. And then, of course, according to this reasoning, the state tries to suppress those rebellions and continues with the assimilation policy that it has adopted in the first place. And of course, therefore, another assumption is that as a consequence of such an historical development in a country, you would always come across a mutual generalized hostility among the Turks, among the Kurds, and among the ethnic groups, and in Turkey in this case, among the Turks and among the Kurds. Now, I don't agree with this argument that the state in Turkey adopted an assimilationist policy. First of all, in the early 1920s, it was cultural nationalism that the state, the founders of the state, adopted. In the early 1920s, one day Atatürk came out and explained what Turkish nation means, according to him. He said, we are now making this transition from a religious community to a secular nation, and we are calling that nation a Turkish nation, Türk milleti. So what does Türk milleti mean? And he said, first of all, let me point out that from this point onwards, everybody who lives on this geography may be referred to as making up of a nation, because he said they display a high degree of homogeneity, and he said people living on this geography for centuries have exchanged among themselves all kinds of values, attitudes, so there has been a high degree of mutual acculturation between these different elements, and therefore we have a homogeneous group of people, and therefore we can call that group now a nation, millet, in its not in its Ottoman sense, but in its sort of French, in its European, in its modern sense. But more importantly, he said, but why do we call this nation Turkish nation? Now, this is very critical. He said we needed a name for it. Very important. We needed a name for it, and this word Turk was the most well-known word. Therefore, we called it Türk milleti, Turkish nation. Now, the important thing here is that he was using this word Turk as a name and not as an adjective. So he was using it as an umbrella term, you see, and he was not therefore saying everybody living in Turkey is a Kurd in an ethnic sense. And then the Republic moved, at least legally, constitutionally, from cultural nationalism to civic nationalism. In the 1924 Constitution, Article 88 stipulated that irrespective of race and religion, every citizen of Turkey is a Turk. So this is a civic nationalism. But underneath, cultural nationalism continued among the statesmen as well as among the people. In fact, the findings I have shared with you a moment ago clearly indicates that Kurds, in fact, Turks think along the same line, that what holds people together is the similar culture. As far as the state was concerned, I don't have much time, but this is an interesting anecdote. We had an ambassador in Romania. Now I'm talking about early 1930s. This ambassador discovered Gagos Turks in Romania. Gagos Turks are Christians, but they speak Turkish. So he was very excited about this. He sent a cable to Ankara and he said, we have Turks here. Why don't I encourage these people to migrate to Turkey? And Ankara's response was, no, thank you, they are not Turks because they are Christians. And then years later, Bosnians wanted to come here, and they were welcomed. Bosnians did not speak Turkish, but they were Muslims, you see. They shared the similar culture. So what I am arguing in my book and in my various writings on this issue, that the state therefore did not try to assimilate Kurds, because state, after all, did not see much of a difference between the Kurds and the Kurds. So why would you try to assimilate one group of people into another if you don't see much of a difference? But then, of course, the state took some measures. Now, many people looking at those measures come to the conclusion that, in fact, the state had adopted a policy of assimilation. What I am arguing is it was not assimilation. It was a deliberate non-recognition of the secondary identities of the Kurds, and that was supposed to be for a while. Because what had happened was, from the 1921 onwards, you have some rebellions, and three of them rather important rebellions, the ones in 1924, 1930, and 1937. And therefore, Ankara, being aware of the fact that the Kurds are not Turks, after all, Inönü at Lausanne Peace Conference, when he was referring to people living in Anatolia, he had talked about Turks, Kurds, and so on and so forth. They were aware of the fact that they were not Turks, they were Kurds, but you see they had introduced this generic notion of nationalism. So everybody was Turk, but at the same time everybody had a secondary identity. But what Ankara was rather concerned about was that the Kurds' secondary identity may now develop because of these rebellions into their primary identity. And therefore Kurds would no longer feel themselves as part of this country, of this nation. You know, they may develop into a nation. You see, if whatever your primary identity, you belong to that nation. So they took some measures, but these measures were aimed at integrating the Turks, or I should say maintaining the integration between the Turks and the Kurds rather than trying to assimilate them. Now, why do I think along those lines? As I said, it was part, underlining their secondary identities and in the process turning them into primary identities. Now, let me share with you some of the measures the state adopted. For instance, Kurds, and for that matter, all ethnic groups were proscribed not to give ethnic names to their children. Names of places were changed. The usage of some ethnic appellations like Kürt, Kurdistan, Circassian, the Laz, Lazistan were prohibited. Now I'm talking about 1920s and 1930s. When we come to 1960s and 1980s, particularly in the wake of some military interventions, this policy of non-recognition from time to time in the hands of some people resembled assimilation. I should point that out. For instance, in the 1980s, the military in particular denied the existence of a separate Kurdish existence in Turkey. 1982 Constitution did not talk about an official language, but talked about a mother tongue when it was referring to Turkish. And advocacy of cultural rights were forbidden, not group rights, but cultural rights, like talking in Turkish, etc. A party was closed because it talked about Kurdish people of Turkey. But all along, on the other hand, what we have observed, I have about 4 minutes, I shall finish in 4 minutes, favorable attitudes on the part of the state towards the Kurds, and a gradual lifting of those measures. Now, my argument is that if the state had resorted to a policy of assimilation, you wouldn't have favorable attitudes, and you would not have started lifting some of those measures I have mentioned. Because either you assimilate some people or you don't. I mean, if you think these people have not been assimilated, you would just continue sticking to those policies. What favorable attitudes am I talking about? In 1947, for instance, Recep Peker, known for his authoritarian views, started talking about the secondary identity of Kurds. This is in 1940s. It was only in 1938 that the second major Kurdish rebellion had come to an end. In 1948, government helping people going back to the southeast. During the rebellion, some of these people were banished to the western parts of Turkey. Now, and then they were allowed to go back. That's another phenomenon which really, I think, supports my thesis. I mean, if you are trying to assimilate these people, and you banished some people to the western parts of Turkey, why would you allow them to go back? Sometimes 9 months later, sometimes 10 months later. In Parliament, one MP, one member of Parliament asked, "What are we helping these people when they are, returning back to their towns, to their region?" And the related minister responded to this, "Yes, this is winter, so we are providing some makeshift facilities to accommodate these people. We are providing basic facilities." And a year later, now state began to provide land, seeds, animals, foodstuffs, as well as monetary aid to the people they had initially banished to the western parts of Turkey. 1952, now the Democrats in power, Ekrem Hayri Üstündağ, Minister of Social Security, in a speech in Parliament, he declared that people in the East has the greatest love and devotion to their country. In 1954, Celal Bayar, as president, was saying the Kurds, he was talking about, quote unquote, the Kurds' valiant defense of the country during the Turkish War of Independence. I have 1 minute, and then gradual lifting of measures. In 1945, the inspectors general's powers, this inspector general, this was again created in 1937. Its history goes back to the 1840s. Their powers began to be turned over to the civilian governors of the provinces. In 1957, we see the kin of the leader of the 1925 Kurdish rebellion being elected to president, and Adnan Menderes played a very critical role in his election. And then, of course, we know some of the developments more recently. Starting from 1988, we start talking about cultural rights of the Kurds. In 1989, we talked about free expression of the Kurdish ethnic identity is necessary. We start talking about the need of granting cultural rights to the Kurds. A little later, Süleyman Demirel, the 9th president of the country, came out and openly said there is a Kurdish reality. And then, of course, the more recent openings in this regard. As I look at Turkey today, we have a fourfold policy concerning the Kurds. In all probability, these will be discussed, among the Prime Minister and Deniz Baykal in the days to come. Now, we want to put away terror. I think that's the first priority. But parallel to that, the socio-economic development of the region. Third, putting an end to the maltreatment of the Kurds. And finally, I think we shall provide some additional cultural rights to the Kurds. Group rights, collective rights, as they are sometimes called, are not granted to ethnic minorities in any country, and in all probability in this country too. That's something we won't do. And as I see it, Prime Minister and the Chief of the General Staff, both of them have agreed on these 4 points. As far as Baykal is concerned, he still continues to have some concern about the cultural rights. In fact, he is him who, for instance, is not quite sure whether, introducing Kurdish as an elective course may in due course turn into a compulsory course, and then, the secondary identity of the Kurds may end up being the primary identity of the Kurds. That's all that I could do in 32 minutes. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Professor Heper for his very illuminating talk, sharing his views on this very important topic, and also putting it into an historical context and so on. As he says, we have just under 15 minutes worth of time left. If anyone has any questions, I'm sure there must be some, we can respond to them. Okay, I saw the first gentleman at the back here.
Yani sizce bu bir hata mı? Hani o zamanlar için Türkiye'ye bu isim verilmesi ya da bütün milletin ismi verilmesi bir hata mı? Yoksa yani eğer bu bir hataysa hani bunun yerine bir X Cumhuriyeti mesela denseydi ve biz de X Nation'ın insanları olsaydı hani bu Kürt sorunu olmayacak.
Okay, thank you. Okay, right, okay. The question is, was it wrong to talk about Turkish nation? Wouldn't it be better if we refer to this nation by another name? That's the question. Well, this question was raised by Turgut Özal, for instance, when he was Prime Minister. In a polemical way, he said, perhaps we should have called people, Turkish people, as Anatolians, for instance. But the important thing was, while you are dealing with this issue, you are also in the process of a nation building. The Turkish Republic did not inherit a nation. Turkish people, Turkish Republic inherited religious communities. So you had to create your own nation. By the way, we sometimes talk about nation building in Turkey, but I think we should talk about a state building its nation. It was the other way around. We had a state but no nation. And therefore, while you were building a nation, you used a word which could be interpreted both ethnically and non-ethnically. Atatürk underlined that he was using this in a non-ethnic sense. But we should also remember that the Turks we inherited from the Ottoman Empire consider themselves, up until that point, up until the 19th century, as Muslims, as non-Turks. So you are trying to deal with an ethnic question, but at the same time you are trying to build a nation. So you use an ethnic word, but you use it in a non-ethnic sense, and that makes sense to me. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take the one young lady here.
Thanks for your excellent information. I want to ask whether we can compare Turkey's situation with regard to Kurds with any other country, like, for example, France, Belgium, Spain, and also we take their solution as a solution to us? Multicultural policy or assimilation policy?
You know, I've talked about nation building and state trying to build a nation. In all those countries, there were nations, and they built their states. Now, in Turkey, it was not so. I mean, we should not forget that in the Ottoman Empire, Turks, sometimes referred to as Turkmens, were one of the elements, and the state did not represent them. You see, that there was a distance between the state and all these different ethnic and religious elements. So Turkey's experience and Turkey's problems are therefore very, very different from those in Europe.
There was a young lady over here.
Can you state the main reason for initiating this idea in the current time, especially this time? Why you are or why Turkey initiating this idea, Kurdish? Why were there any efforts in the past, or it just related to the current time from external economic effects?
Well, I think this question must have been addressed to the government, to Recep Tayyip Erdogan. But also, but on the other hand, you know, we should keep in mind that Turkey is trying to be a full member of the European Union, and therefore, starting, you know, sometimes in the 1990s, we have tried to make openings on several fronts, and therefore we also felt the need to make an opening when it came to Kurdish question. But you know, apart from that, you know, we should always keep in mind that so many people got killed, so much blood has been shed from 1984 to the present. We have always tried to do something about it. You know, we tried to solve this question by military means, and then we came to the conclusion, and even more importantly, military itself also came to this conclusion that this question can no longer be resolved by military means. So both our efforts to become a full member of the European Union and the military beginning to say that the military means is just one of the means one should use, but it should be complemented by other policies, open the way, and of course we have also entered a period, I think, in our political development that we are trying to solve so many problems we have inherited from the past. Cyprus, Armenian question, the Kurdish question. So this opening may also be seen as part of that general opening.
Further question?
Thank you. You always, how we comment about the relation between the Kurdish citizens and the Turkish state? Would it be called, can I call it healthy? My second question would be, you conveyed the picture as if these reforms and these elevations of the Kurdish rights in Turkey have turned out as a part of a big agenda, regardless of the government changes by the state of Turkey. Can you say that you always have had a current Kurdish agenda that would lift up the rights of the Kurdish citizens throughout the years of the Turkish Republic? And can we say that this has always been in a linear state? I mean, increasing, or do we have falls or backs and forths between this throughout the years?
we is rather tricky. I mean, in different periods, different groups have perceived this question from different perspectives. In my formal presentation, for instance, I have pointed out that when we had military interventions, we began to take more harsh measures. And then at other times, our policies towards the southeast were different. When we ask Kurds, what is the most important problem Turkey faces, and this question has been asked in a number of nationwide surveys, and when you ask this question to Kurds, they usually take it as what is my most important problem. A great many of them say it is the economy, it is the unemployment, it is the underdevelopment of our region. And then second, or parallel to that, comes the maltreatment in the hands of the government. Now, in my studies, I came to the conclusion that maltreatment of the Kurds were not really the official policy of those people at the higher echelons of the state. Maltreatment has never been the official policy of Ankara, but in the localities, that was not the case. We treated Kurds very badly, and now we are coming to the conclusion that this was all wrong, and we are trying to do something about it, but I think it will take some time. It's very, very difficult to change the attitudes of the administrators, of the military serving in these regions. But we should also keep in mind that the government, the bureaucracy, always look down upon the people everywhere. I mean, are we treated very well when we go to a government office? But the Kurds, were engaged in rebellions. They were also considered even less civilized than the rest of us. And, civilizing Turkey, of course, has also been an important function, an important duty that the state considered itself that it was responsible for this. So there has been ups and downs, and also not only ups and downs in a general sense, but different groups, different political parties, different institutions treated Kurds differently.
Okay, there is more questions on this side. We're running out of time, so we can have one more short question. Okay, gentlemen here want to
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'd just like to ask quickly, I was surprised that in the SETA Vakfi's questionnaire, we had religion, kardeşlik duygusu, national values, and common history. I was surprised that language isn't there. And if, was it subsumed under one of those categories? And if so, was that a consequential omission or try not to use consequential omission?
Okay, it's religion, din, kardeşlik duygusu, feeling of fraternity, common history and geography, national cultural values. They were also asked, how about rule of law and democracy, is it important? 1.5% said it is important. Republican values, 2.4% said it is important, and 1.5% said nothing is important. In other words, there is nothing that acts as a bond that holds us together. So these are very interesting findings.
Okay, let's thank Professor Heper. And thank you all for coming. I will just make one little announcement. In 4 weeks' time, on the 11th of November, we have our second Library Lunchtime lecture. Professor Orhan Aytur, who is Vice Provost of the University, will give a lecture entitled The Realm of the Coral, Colour, Camouflage, Consumption, Cleaning and Courtship Under the Tropical Sea. I hope to see all of you or many of you here then. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting.
Let's take this off.